Good evening and welcome. I am calling to order the Monday, September 28th, 2020 Planning Commission meeting at 6:30 p.m. Tonight's Planning Commission meeting will be held virtually by using Zoom and in person while following social distancing guidelines. As Vice Chair, I'll be leading the Planning Commission meeting tonight, and the public is welcome to participate when invited throughout the meeting. Members of the public may attend this meeting in person or join via online Zoom. If attendees experience audio problems, we suggest you leave the meeting and then rejoin. This has usually fixed the issue. Additional instructions on how to participate are posted online at www.burnsvilleminnesota.gov, burnsvillemn.gov, in the public meeting calendar. As usual, tonight's meeting is available for viewing on BCTV and on the city's website. If you are unable to participate this evening and would like to submit public testimony, I encourage you to email your comments to city staff or mail your comments directly to City Hall. You may participate in the meeting tonight online by going to https://zoom.us/join and typing in meeting ID 953-4079-1645. Once you're logged into the meeting, please use the chat feature to tell the moderator which item you'd like to speak to. You may also call into the meeting tonight at 651-372-8299 and again enter meeting ID 953-4079-1645. For each public hearing, I will open up a time when callers may speak to that item and give more instructions. Your call will be muted until that time comes along. Please note, there may be a slight delay due to the differences in technology. If speaking by phone, please mute your computer since there may be that delay. So now, on to the agenda. So the first item on the Planning Meeting Commission tonight is the adoption of the agenda. Do any of the Planning Commission members have any changes to the agenda?
No.
I don't see anybody. Staff, do you have any changes to tonight's agenda?
None from staff.
None from staff. Good deal. So then can I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
I move that we adopt the agenda.
Second.
Commissioner Wada moves, Commissioner Roberts seconds, and any discussion?
Nope.
Seeing none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Not hearing none, I think that passed. Okay, let's also consider the approval for the September 14, 2020 Planning Commission meeting. We had the minutes that were included in the packet. Are there anybody that has changes on the commission?
No.
No.
Nobody? How about staff?
No changes from staff.
No changes? All right. Well, can I get a motion?
I'll move.
I have a motion?
I'll second.
Okay. Motion by Commissioner Henderson, second by Commissioner Anderson. And all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Sounds like it passes. So on to number 3, it's a public hearing for application of Prince of Peace Lutheran Church for a planned unit development amendment to reduce the parking for the site at 13801 Fairview Drive and to remove previous PUD conditions and approvals related to lots number 2 and 3, Block 1, Ridges 12th Edition. It looks like Mrs. Madden, you're going to be taking on for today?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Planning Commissioners. As Commissioner John stated, the item before you this evening will be a public hearing. Prince of Peace has been in for different plan unit development amendments a number of times over the years. So the original plan unit development campus that this church is located on is known as the Ridges PUD, and it consists of a number of properties in the area: Prince of Peace, Park Nicollet, Fairview, Ridges Hospital, Ebenezer, the YMCA are just to name a few of the main property owners in the area. So the Prince of Peace original building of the church, according to records, was originally constructed in 1976. It is on don't think the laser will work, but it is on, as you can see in the aerial photo, it's on the northern property highlighted in red, both in your packet and on the presentation. Throughout their kind of its time in operation, there have been additions to the church building as well as expansions to their parking areas and different plats of the property. The most recent was Ridge's 12th edition, which was done in 2018, where it was platted in order to kind of confirm this lot line change, that you could see the southern two lots kind of have a scraggled line, and it's based on a different watershed district. So what's under review tonight is related specifically to their parking amounts. So the three properties within the Prince of Peace portion of the Ridges PUD have had kind of shared parking, and parking has been removed and added over the years as different buildings have been constructed, just through the PUD amendment process. The request for the plan unit development this evening is so that all of the parking that is required as a minimum amount for the Prince of Peace Church is to be accommodated on the principal lot that their building is located on, and to remove the shared parking agreement, which was a condition of the 2018 PUD, from their request. So it would be rescinding that condition that was requiring that shared parking agreement, as well as approving a deviation for a reduction in the total amount of parking spaces that would be the minimum that is required. So this would reduce that minimum rate from 733 to 420 spaces. So no actual construction or changes are proposed as part of this application. It's just related to their approvals for their land use and parking as a whole on this lot. Also included in this request is the rescinding of two plan unit developments amendments from 2018 and from, I believe it's from the 2013, from just the two southern lots. They're trying to prepare those for development ready. So there are actually, as part of their three properties, if you view them as the three that they own, there are 929 parking spaces. The minimum required from the last major plan unit development amendment, which covered some of these minimums for parking, green space, impervious surface, is 833 spaces. The number of spaces that are solely available on the subject lot is 420 spaces, and on their current site plan that they've provided as part of this application, they are showing that there would be room for some proof of parking spaces of about, 22 spaces. Yes, 22 proof of parking spaces, and so you can see those, if we zoom in a little bit, under the southwest corner of the actual church building. There is a space where they could add more. They're not required to as part of this application, but they are showing that there is space if they need more. But based on the information that has been provided, staff is supportive of the deviation based on current church operations and the phasing of services. The way that the parking ordinance is set up, as you may remember from a recent code change, is that parking for a building is calculated based on all the uses in the building as if they were all occurring at the same time. So it's based on that maximum occupancy. Based on the unique situation with a church facility such as this, where it's a large membership and there are multiple services, as well as different activities during the week, not every bit of the space in the building is used at the same time. And even on their largest attendance days, the parking spaces would be adequate for those multiple services on those major holidays where there's some kind of maximum attendance for church members and parishioners. So the benefits to this PUD amendment is that it helps to provide parking that meets demand but is not an oversupply, which is a goal in the 2040 comprehensive plan. The proposal does have the support of neighboring property owners within the plan unit development. And in the case of Prince of Peace, this is to find a solution to foster some of that redevelopment of the southern two parcels, which contain additional parking in that office type of building. So again, the deviation as part of their plan unit development amendment this evening is a reduction in the minimum amount of required parking. They could at any time choose to increase the number of parking spaces on the site, but this would just cement in the findings the number of required minimums. So with every plan unit development amendment that occurs in this particular, when most PUDs, but in particular this one, we go back to the development of the site and the minimums that were provided in that 24 plan unit development amendment. So this was a larger scale amendment compared to some of the ones that the commission sees. So this was to facilitate some of that future development on the site, and it established campus-wide standards for these 3 lots. So that's related to green space, parking, and impervious. So because of the proposed proof of parking, those charts were adjusted in order to account for if that was ever installed, just so that it was covered as part of the plan unit development charts. Even with those changes in impervious and green space, they would still be well within the standards that were described in that 2004 amendment. So there are no issues from a planning consideration standpoint. So staff is recommending approval of this application, subject to 3 conditions. The first condition is related to removing condition number 2B from that 2018 plan unit development amendment, which required that there be a cross-access and parking agreement. So by request of the applicant, this condition is to be rescinded as part of this new plan unit development amendment. The second and third conditions are related to rescinding PUD approvals from the 2018 PUD and a 2013 PUD, related specifically to the southern 2 lots that are owned by Prince of Peace currently, but which they are trying to prepare for redevelopment. So the previous plan unit development will remain in effect for the principal lot, which contains the main Prince of Peace building. It's just from those southern 2 lots. And again, this application is a public hearing this evening. I can stand for questions. We do have a representative from the applicant group that has planned to attend this evening virtually and can answer questions if needed, but I'm of course here in person. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Madden. Any questions from the commissioners?
I have a question.
Commissioner Watt?
What does proof of parking mean?
Proof of parking is a parking tool in our zoning ordinance which allows for a reduction in parking. When we apply it to a building permit, it would be a reduction in the required parking, so long as they can show in a site plan where the parking could be installed if necessary. So in this case, it's not going to necessarily be applied in the same way because we're not we're granting a deviation. It's not a building permit, but they're showing that there is additional room for parking on site if it became necessary for their operations, despite what they've shown, which says that the parking that is currently provided is sufficient.
Okay, thank you.
Any other question? Not seeing any. Would the applicant like to speak? Or should we do the public hearing first?
He indicated today that he was available if needed, but he was not planning to speak unless asked to.
Okay, great. The only question I would have is if that maximum capacity, not maximum capacity, if there are, what is the number of parking spaces that they maximally used in the last 5 years? Is this really going to be an issue?
So as part of their narrative letter, which was included in your packet, if you'll give me just a moment to pull that up. They indicated that according to their church attendance records, they did provide the pre-COVID-19 numbers from their 2019 services. The largest church service attendance was 435 total persons. So that's not vehicles, that's individuals.
Great, okay, that's what I thought. Appreciate that. With that, I would like to open up the public hearing if there's anybody online or on Zoom. If you want to raise your hand, you're supposed to hit the 9 button, and that will raise your hand if you're on the phone. Otherwise, on Zoom, just let us know that you would like to speak to this. And if you begin to speak, you hit 6, and it will allow you to speak. At that, I'm going to open up the public hearing at 6:44.
Good evening, Nick Munson here. Can the commission hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good evening, all. As Sarah mentioned, I'm counsel for Prince of Peace, and I've been working with them and Sarah and Deb and other members of the City of Burnsville staff through this process. And at this point, we just want to first and foremost thank everyone for their cooperation and their assistance. There's been questions and answers throughout this process, and everyone's just been extremely helpful. And so this evening, my intent was to make myself available to the extent there was any questions about the application that weren't covered in Sarah's write-up, but otherwise I think the write-up covers, essentially what we're trying to accomplish here. So with that, if the commission has questions for me, I'm happy to entertain those. Otherwise, I will go back on mute.
Great, thank you. Commissioners, do you have any questions for the representative? It doesn't look like anybody has the questions, but I really appreciate you joining us tonight and being available for questions if we had them. That is great.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else on the phone to speak to this issue? Anybody on the Zoom? Okay, it doesn't look like anybody. So I will close the public hearing at 6:46. And I'm going to turn it over to the commissioners. Commissioners, any discussion on this?
Yeah.
Commissioner Roberts.
Actually, mine is more of a comment, not a question. It was nice to read in the packet that they reached out to the neighbors, and knowing that their main neighbors, the hospital and the Ebenezer facility and things like that, are all on board, and they've had a relationship for a long, long time. And I know that's one of the things that this commission looks at a lot, is what the neighbors are thinking about what's going to happen. And going forward with this, I didn't see any red flags at all. So I think it was done very well by staff, and everything kind of cut the bases right down to where it sounded really good. So, nice job.
Any other commissioners? No, it doesn't look like anybody. Do I get a motion?
Yes.
Commissioner Roberts?
I would like to make a motion that the planning commission send this for approval to the city council for the application of Prince of Peace Lutheran Church for a planned unit development PUD amendment to reduce parking for the site at 13801 Fairview Drive, and to remove previous PUD conditions and approvals related to lots 2 and 3, Block 1, Ridges, 12th edition, subject to the following 3 conditions that are listed.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Commissioner Roberts motioned and Commissioner Henderson seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll bring it up to a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Hearing none, it was a unanimous decision. Great, thank you. And thank you for Prince of Peace for joining us again. We really appreciate taking the time to be there to answer our questions. And with that, we'll move on to the next agenda item, and that is a public hearing for the application of the City of Burnsville for an ordinance amendment to Title 10 zoning, Chapter 7, General Provisions, Section 52 of the Burnsville City Code, to incorporate changes related to accessory dwelling units. It looks like Ms. Dean, the Assistant Community Developer Director, will be giving the presentation tonight. Go ahead, Ms. Dean.
Thank you, Vice Chair John. So I'm just going to go over just a little bit of information on what started the proposal that's before you tonight. So we did have a recent request through a building permit for an accessory dwelling unit to be located on an R1 single-family zone property. And we do allow accessory dwelling units now in our R1 and our R1A zone properties. There are some requirements when you look at our city code on either limitations or specific requirements in order to qualify to have one. One of those being if you are on an R1 zone property, then your lot size, in order to have a detached accessory dwelling unit, your lot size needs to be a minimum of 1 acre in square footage. So that's 1 acre in size. Square footage equivalent is 43,560 square feet. The particular request was for a lot under that, approximately 13,000 square feet. So that was one kind of red flag when we looked at the building permit for review. The other item that came into question was the size of the unit. There is a maximum size of the unit, a percentage requirement, which would be the equivalent to 569 square feet for this particular property. And the request was for up to 704 square feet. When reviewing the building permit, the planner that was reviewing the proposal notified the applicant that in their particular case, a detached dwelling unit of that size would not be allowed per the current city ordinance, and that an option would be to do an attached accessory dwelling unit meeting the criteria. The particular building permit applicant wanted to see if perhaps the ordinance could be changed to accommodate for their proposal. And so in August, I went before the city council to kind of gauge their temperature. Typically, we would present this at a work session as a sketch plan to see if there's appetite to change the ordinance or not on any particular subject. And so posed the question to see if council would be open to various options, and I think I threw out 5 different options. And what it came down to, I'm kind of jumping ahead, but this is the example of the proposal that the building permit applicant had requested. And so what it came down to was the city council was in favor of making changes to our ordinance to allow detached accessory dwelling units on all R1 and R1A lots, no matter what the size, and that the principal building, the accessory dwelling unit could be up to 50% of the size of the principal building. So this would allow the particular person with the building permit application to build this accessory dwelling structure. And then in the background, your background, and the city council's background, just kind of going back in my presentation, but this was something that was studied pretty heavily over almost a year-long process. It was first kicked off, just a little history, at a city council meeting, all-day work session in 2017, where the city council directed city staff to take a look at temporary health care units and accessory dwelling units. And so the direction was to go through a governance process. So we did that. I did that through a white paper, which evaluated our market cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, some other surrounding cities that aren't part of our market cities, but other Twin Cities locations, as well as locations throughout the country. So there was an example in California and the Pacific Northwest, and on the East Coast, a couple of examples were provided, just so that the council could have all the information that they needed. We also brought in, as part of that process, expert testimony. So there were people that lived in tiny homes that came and spoke. There were people that are part of the real estate community, developers that are looking at multi-generational housing and incorporating that into their new floor plans. And then there was some council dialogue. And ultimately, the city council and through the planning commission process decided on a set of ordinance criteria, which eventually was implemented in our city code. And largely it was modeled, the direction at the time was largely modeled after Egan's ordinance. And eventually in 2018 that was approved. And then again, as you can see on the slide, in August 2020, we did receive direction from city council to make these changes. So that is what is in your packet tonight, specifically mentioning the maximum size and then allowance of detached units on all R1 and R1A lots. There is a red line of that version, of that specific direction from our city council that we would like you to act upon. Staff does recommend approval to the city council as the ordinance is drafted in your packet. Certainly, if there are any questions, I'd be more than happy to stand. I did receive a phone call this evening about one of the items in the existing ordinance as it pertains to park dedication fees. That was something that city council did not give us direction on changing. As part of the current ordinance, we do require that park dedication fees are paid due to the intensification of the land use. Adding an additional accessory dwelling unit does intensify the property. Therefore, at the time that this was originally approved, that was included in the ordinance, as well as any sewer and water connection type fees, utility fees. I believe there may be somebody from the public that would like to speak at the public hearing portion as well, but more than happy to stand for any additional questions.
Great, thank you, Ms. Dean.
You're welcome.
Commissioners, any questions? Commissioner Wad?
So what is the park dedication fee, or for example, how much is that?
For single family, for the one accessory dwelling unit, it's approximately $2,600.
Okay.
And that would be payable at time of building permit.
And then there's increased sewer and water accessibility fees as well? Can you kind of run down what the fees are, or you don't know?
I don't have those fees prepared, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Any other questions? Commissioner Anderson?
I'm just kind of curious. Is there any concern with the idea that it's kind of almost like turning a single-family home into a multifamily lot, I guess, like that? Is that an issue that people would have? I mean, I don't know if anything particular about the specific house we were talking about here, if their neighbors had any insight into it, or if it's just a thought.
So if I may answer, based off of the cannot be larger than 50% of the principal dwelling unit, our city attorney felt that that was still in keeping with not being a duplex or a multi-family type property, because it would be subordinate to the principal structure. As far as neighboring concerns, because this is just through building permit, no notification is required, as it would for a variance or a plan unit development type of request. So for this particular property, no notification. The only notification for the particular ordinance change is through the newspaper, and that would just be standard procedure for ordinance change. So any change would be a citywide change. Of course, the applicant that came before us for the building permit benefits from that, but it would be a citywide change overall.
Any other questions?
I have a couple more questions.
Go ahead, Commissioner Wad.
Do you know off the top of your head what's this, like the rear, what are the setbacks for a typical R1 property? Rear yards, side yard I know is 10 feet, rear yard setback is,
So it would be for the accessory dwelling or accessory structure setbacks would prevail for this. Maybe Sarah can answer.
I think I can do it. So I think for accessory structures, so the rear setback should be 8 feet and the side is 5 feet. For the principal structure, you are right that the side is 10 and the rear is 30.
okay. So the accessory dwelling unit could be 8 feet from the neighbor's property line in the backyard, just to kind of get a sense for what's being considered.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Did you have any more questions, Commissioner Wad? You said a
I
couple.
do, but I just can't think of what they are right now, so
Okay,
come up later. Thank you.
all right. I do have a couple questions. So when I watched the video from 2017, it looked like there was a little bit of back and forth with the city council. Has that been resolved now? Are they solidly behind this proposal with the ADUs and the tiny homes?
So if I may answer that, at the time, the council makeup was a little different. The council member, gosh, I'm blanking on his name, I'm
Coughlin.
so sorry. Kaufman?
Coughlin?
Coughlin, yes, was on the council at the time, and Councilmember Workman was on the planning commission at the time. So the council makeup is different as far as the, where the votes, I guess, sway. I can say as a majority, they were always in favor of some type of accessory dwelling unit. I think at the time, if I can recall, Councilmember Coughlin was pretty adamant on kind of the size and really wanted to follow Egan's model. And I think, consensus that we saw in August of this year was they're open to being a little more flexible and that was the majority.
Okay, and is there any other neighboring cities in the market research that would be at 50% like this one is, or would we be the largest in this type of units?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I haven't done a rerun of the accessory dwelling unit standards to date, since that research that was done in 2017, 2018. I don't recall that anyone was necessarily that large. Other cities did have caps on things like percentage of lot size. Maybe a conditional use permit was required as part of their review, so that there was a little more, if perhaps they proposed something that was maybe too close in the city's view to a property line, that some mitigation standards could be placed. For example, let's say somebody wanted to put an ADU close to a rear property line. Well, maybe that particular city would say you need to plant a row of evergreens between the structure and your neighbor. So, I mean, I'm sure if we went back and looked back, a number of different combinations that one could come to. But no, I can't recall if that 50% number or not. I apologize.
No worries. And the last question I had was, are there a lot of applicants for having an ADU added, or is the one you cited the only one we've had so far? Have there been more than multiple?
So this particular request was the first one that we've had for a detached accessory dwelling unit that would meet the official city code ADU standards. What I mean by that, we do allow what I would call multi-generational type living, or if someone wanted to convert their basement into living space where they have a kitchen and maybe a renter down below, we would allow that as long as there's no physical firewall separation between the two. So you still have to have access between the two units, and we would allow that just by right through a building permit. So we have had some of those where people will, convert some living space or add, maybe an addition and have that kind of pass-through area. This would be the first official accessory dwelling unit application. We did, I believe, just receive one right after this for a detached accessory dwelling unit as well. But I believe that meets the lot size. So we've got, I would say, 2 on the books that are making their way through the process now.
Great. Commissioner Wad, do you, second chance?
I'm good.
Good, all right. With that, I will open the public hearing. It looks like it's 7:03, and it doesn't look like we have anybody on the phone from what I could tell, or on Zoom, but we do have somebody in person. Please go ahead and walk up to the microphone. I need your name and address.
It's Christine with a K, Kristine, Wiese, Wiese, and it's 13605 Wellington Crescent, Burnsville,
Thank you.
55337.
Thank you, Ms. Weiss. Go ahead.
Yes. Well, my husband had addressed, and he was the applicant for the ADU, and I could not be here today, but what we'd respectfully like is a discussion regarding the feasibility of waiving the park and rec fee, given that this ADU application is very unique, and that this generally would apply to commercial ventures, not on private residential properties. We have also planted 15 trees, have done landscaping, and have passed the erosion inspection. So it's something that we think that really isn't applicable to this particular application.
Okay. Do you know what those fees are? You don't-
We were informed it was a $2,600 fee.
Okay.
And part of our purpose with the business is to keep fees as low as possible for people that are looking usually to adding a granny flat or an additional dwelling for specific reasons that may already, the goal would be cost saving. And this might be a bit more prohibited because it sounds like there are more fees that may be in the works that you outlined that, you know, have not been identified yet. So that's our concern, is that this already seems a bit prohibited for this type of application.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Weiss? Commissioner Wad?
Hi, thanks for coming in. This is, you're proposing to put this on your own,
That's right, on our
Property,
residents
okay.
in Burnsville. Mhm.
and you mentioned you want to keep fees low. Is this like, is this like a business where you're going to be, you are potentially doing this for other people too, or?
Well, right, my husband does have, this is his potential business, that this would be our model, but this would be a living model that we would be able to use and to, that would be part of the selling point, because we
Okay.
also wanted to keep the business in Burnsville.
Yep,
And, but it would not be, you know, it'd be something that would be appointment only, that wouldn't be, you know, a high traffic type business. It could be virtual also with our website, so,
so you're
So-
not necessarily going to have a tenant there if it's a model that you're,
right,
Okay.
exactly. So,
okay, I'm just
yeah.
getting a better understanding of the situation.
Right. I mean, there is potential that we had discussed, as his parents are in a nursing home right now, and we're not able to move them with the COVID. But his goal essentially has been to create a business that would, can be built on site or moved, and I think he outlined that at the last meeting, so.
Is there a sewer connection from the unit to the house?
One could be installed, or they can have a septic system, you know, a tank version.
Okay.
So, yeah, that can be pumped out, or, so
Okay. And
it could be
then
done with either.
You'd have a separate, if you weren't connected to the house's water and sewer, then you'd have a separate water and waste system for the unit? Is
Well, the
that-
water would need to be, but the sewer itself could be contained, yeah.
Okay, so you do have to have a water connection?
Right, right, we
Okay.
wouldn't have a well, yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
Any other questions, commissioners? Okay. Thank you, Ms. Weiss.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate your time and coming in. And with that, anybody else? And doesn't look like it. I'll close the public hearing at 7:07. And I'm going to open it up to the commission for any discussion. Commissioners?
Yeah, Chris.
Commissioner Roberts?
I guess this is a question for Regina, in that her request to have the fees waived, and that's more of a variance type thing, isn't it? And that's not something we can just say wave a wand and it's gone.
So for the particular building permit application, the planning commission cannot waive any type of fees.
That's what I thought.
Now, when you're looking at the ordinance and making recommendations for changes, there is a line item that does talk about, and I'll get this specifically. Let's see. The line item says, the addition of an ADU is considered an intensification of land use. Park dedication fees shall be collected for each ADU, and any additional utility connection fees shall be collected generally at time of building permit issuance. So if a commission as a whole, you felt, because it talks about intensification of land use, if you felt that this should not be a fee charged citywide for all of the ADU applications that we received, and you want to propose a recommendation to city council on that, since it's not redlined, if you want to bring that up as part of your recommendation, you can certainly do that. I do want to provide, just as I have a little time here, point of clarification on a statement made by the public testimony. In Burnsville, for the accessory dwelling units, if you're in an R1 zone property, you do need to be hooked up to city services, sewer and water facilities. If you're in R1A, that's a little different. And then, of course, if they're building this to be placed in other cities, obviously those rules and requirements would be different.
And R1A would be the larger lots, correct?
Typically, R1A is your larger 2-acre minimum lot size in southwest Burnsville, where those properties are still, some do have septic.
Any other comments, discussion? Commissioner Wad?
I do have I mean, I think it's a, kind of increasing the density of the housing, I think is an important goal. And I do struggle with the fees. You know, to build something like this in your backyard, it's a house. And so it's a, you know, it's a pretty significant investment, to build something like that on your property. So it's, you know, whether we have a, you know, development fee or not, that's not gonna be why these things happen or don't happen, but it's, you know, we've looked at a few of these in my own business, and people like to talk about them, but we don't build them because they're expensive. But I think it's a great, I think more opportunities to increase density, I think, would help the housing stock of the city, and I think that's something we need to talk more about.
Commissioner Anderson.
Just out of curiosity, all right. So this has the potential to increase the number of people that are on like a single lot. Does that change the property taxes that they would then be having to pay?
So in theory, having an additional structure could add value to one's property, therefore increasing their property taxes, absolutely.
Just kind of curious about that.
It would still be considered one lot. It would not be a separate lot that would be taxed, not a separate property identification number. You know, it wouldn't be a separate lot of record. It would all be under one property.
And a follow-up too, that fee that we were talking about, is that just for, what was the exact reasoning for the fee again?
So it's a park dedication fee, and it goes towards new trails, to help pay for new equipment, like play structures, anything new in our parks, or for a new park.
What was triggering the reason for that fee?
For the particular person that spoke tonight, or for the, just in general?
Just in general, yeah.
Yep, so the view was that this is an intensification of the land use, that, you're adding potentially more people to a property, and potentially more impact to our park system.
How much is that fee for just, if they just had a lot there that they were gonna build a house on? Just
Unfortunately, I don't have that information. Those fees are typically calculated through our engineering department, and unfortunately, we don't have our city engineer here today to give them more thorough. I can certainly provide you with that information after.
No, that's okay. I didn't know if it was similar amounts or if it was like the same amounts, if it was the same amount just for adding an accessory.
Unless you happen to know Sarah.
So if I can interrupt, so I believe, and we can correct this after the meeting if needed, but that for a single-family home, that is a flat fee, and that $2,600 would apply in the case of a new single-family home as well, but it is triggered by a plat typically, so it's by adding those units and doing a subdivision of land. So you have also seen on these residential apartment buildings that get approved, there are park dedication fees that are required as part of that, and it's triggered by the platting process, which cements that intensification of land use. But in the case of those larger scale developments, it's a formula based on the number of units. So the justification for why it was included as part of our accessory dwelling unit ordinance initially was because of the calculation based on the number of units, and this is by definition adding an additional dwelling unit.
Okay.
If I might chime in.
Commissioner Wad.
Thank you. It's usually the developer that's paying the park dedication fee, because it's the developer that does the platting of a property, right? And so it seems kind of off that somebody who has a single-family house and they want to, put in a ADU for whatever reason, that they would have to pay these fees as if they were a developer. Especially if the fee is the same as the original, whoever developed that house on that lot has already paid a park dedication fee. That's my take on
Any other? Commissioner Henderson?
To Commissioner Wad, but don't you think in a situation like this, the homeowner is somewhat of the developer?
Yes,
Because they are developing their property, they are developing to add an accessory structure. So they
yeah,
are going to be adding more people to that piece of property, so more people equals more use on trails, on, park equipment, whatever it may be. So there's more wear and tear, so you need to have that additional monies to help with the upkeep.
no, I mean, you have a point. Yeah, no, I'm unclear on what the right answer is, but, I think of, part of it is you think of somebody that's building a 100-unit apartment building and, they're gonna make money building a 100-unit apartment building. The person that's building an ADU in their backyard most likely is not gonna get their investment back. The cost, generally, the cost of building that house behind your house is so high that you can't get it back in rent, and you can't, it doesn't make financial sense for people to do this. Otherwise, we'd be seeing it happen quite a bit.
But that's their decision
That's true, yeah, but it's,
to do that.
right. But it's not, it's a decision not motivated by profit, I guess is what I'm getting at. It's more out of a need, or, there's a lot of reasons to build an ADU behind your house, but I think the current state of our real estate market, you're not doing it as an investment, or, so.
Commissioner Anderson?
I was gonna say that, like, kind of a counter argument to that would be that fee is the same regardless of the size of the family that moves into that house. I mean, you can have, 2 people who move into a house that has 4 bedrooms, they don't have to use all of those bedrooms, but compare that to somebody who has 8 kids, I mean, that's the same fee that they're paying, and then those kids are gonna use those perks just as much. But, I don't know, I can see both sides of the argument, definitely, because, it is important to continue to fund our park services. But then again, like, you're saying, kind of like they're hitting the person twice. And the first one, it was the developer who paid it. Now it's out of their pocket. And it's gonna be kind of hard when you're trying to sell that house. You gotta find a specific person who wants to buy not only your house, but that additional unit that you have on there. So that it's not generally, like you're saying, profit driven, why they would do that.
But on that note, it could also be somebody building an Airbnb in their backyard too,
That's true.
at the same time. So it could be profit generating. I guess it all depends. Any other comments?
Oh, I could probably chime in.
Commissioner Roberts?
I guess I'm looking at it as, our city is a business being run, and we can't run it on nothing. And if there is a fee to do this type of procedure and build this in your backyard, and the staff comes up with this number based on what they think it should be, it's a flat type thing. I would understand that in some situations, if somebody's trying to do this for a grandmother, and they want to keep the cost down, they don't have a lot of money, where I can look at that situation. But then there's going to be 10 other instances that are going to say the opposite. And there's going to be a multiple amount of people, and there is going to be some use and all that. So for us to try to figure out the best for both worlds might be pretty hard. My take on this is I'm not an expert on who's going to move into these and what kind of money they're going to make or not make. But I always look at the fact that the research that our staff has done has given us the indication that this is something that we need. And that's something, my understanding, didn't change. That was there before, correct? I mean, of all the list of stuff that's on here, we've got red lines through certain things. And basically what we're changing is the size of the building and the size of the lot you can do it on.
If I may help
Yeah.
answer, so at the city council meeting, the council gave specific direction on the 2 items related to the maximum 50% and then the allowance of the detached onto any R1 or R1A lot, regardless of the size. There was some discussion from the city council that or comments, I should say, that there was some leaning towards wanting to make some other changes to the ordinance, but that would be saved for later, alluding to we will be doing a large-scale city code update process, not only looking at this title, but through the entire city code, and maybe some indication that some additional changes would be made. But at that specific meeting, just those two.
Right, and we're looking at the specific red indications that are on this, not the whole document. If we want to give a suggestion of line 20 and want to send that to the city council, we're allowed to do that.
Correct, you can make
But
that
that sounds like
recommendation.
that's something that could be looked at in the future once we complete what we're supposed to do today.
That's correct as well.
Okay.
I mean, either way, you could give them recommendation tonight, or
Right.
that's something that can be looked at in the future.
Without specific evidence knowing how this is gonna roll out, you know, I mean, it could be something that changed down the road. It could. But as of right now, I was looking at this as we're looking at the red line changes right now, specifically. Okay.
And that's a fair point. Thank you, Commissioner Roberts, for setting us straight.
No, I was just.
So any discussion on the 50% or the less than acre size lot? Personally, I'm a little bit concerned about the 50% the size of it, of the main dwelling unit. Nobody else has a issue with that at all? It's really hard. Commissioner Anderson?
That's the square footage of the main dwelling, like if it's 2-3 levels, just all of it, and you can have a pretty sizable tiny home. That's not so tiny that.
That's my concern. But all of a sudden, you know, we have multi-units in one small lot. You know, it's not acre size anymore.
Right?
But doesn't other things come into play, impervious surface, all these other rules and regulations that they have to follow as well? So it doesn't necessarily, can be up 50%, correct? Because there's other things that they have to follow.
So they still, an applicant still would have to meet the setback requirements. If they're in shoreland, that's where a maximum impervious surface would come into play. There are some changes that will be coming related to watershed district, depending on which watershed district you're in, may have some specific impervious surface maximums. That's not quite out yet, but could. You know, certainly today, if someone wanted if their principal structure, if they wanted to build out to the setbacks, like technically they could. You could have what some people would call a McMansion back in the day, you know, occupying all corners, but that's typically you don't see that happening. Just as an example, I mean, somebody, I forget which commissioner asked, how many applications have we received for accessory dwelling units? And in the past couple of years, too, in a town of, you know, 65,000 people, it's at this point in time, it's not going to be the norm. Now, you see that out in other states for sure, that it is starting to become the norm, but I think it'll, you know, be a while before Minnesota catches up, I guess, to our coasts.
When you say ADU, it doesn't necessarily mean a tiny house either. It could be a shed, could be a garage, just something that's attached, correct? I suppose the dwelling word in there would make it more of a living space. I take back my question. Commissioner Anderson?
Just out of curiosity, can people ask to have multiple accessory dwelling units on their property, or is there like a one limit?
Maximum of one.
Okay, just check.
Commissioner Roberts?
Just to help you out, I mean, if you think of a lot size and you have a building and you're trying to do 50% of that, being able to actually do that on that lot might be impossible, because it's just, as you get a bigger main building, that other building can't fit. So I don't know if we're gonna have a big problem with that. Tiny houses, you can't have everything on wheels, that doesn't count. It has to be a permanent structure. It has to have a foundation. So things like those, you can't put 5 or 6, I mean, I don't think we're looking at that, you know. There's a 300 square foot minimum, you know, things like that. So there's a lot of things on here that are gonna prevent people from doing this unless it's a perfect storm, that it all fits into play. I think this is making things easier for staff and a little bit more clear for people, percentage-wise and stuff. I could see this being manipulated down the road, I really could. But once we get some things in place, then we can go forward. They're changing this based on things that are happening now. So I looked at it from a different point of view of, I went through about 4 different scenarios in my head of why someone would want to build something like that. And they're all different. So
Those are very good points, thank you. Any other commissioners have a comment, discussion? All right, well, with that, we can look to get a motion. Anybody have a motion to make? Commissioner Roberts?
is, I guess from the standpoint of a motion, it's pretty simplistic. I guess we recommend to the city council from the planning commission to approve the proposed ordinance amendment as drafted. Correct? Yeah.
If you choose.
That was your recommendation from.
That's staff's recommendation, correct.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
Well, it sounds like Commissioner Roberts made a motion. Any second?
I'll second.
Commissioner Henderson seconds. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, I will call for a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Sounds like the ayes have it. That was an aye for me as well.
Abstain.
Commissioner Timmerman abstains. And with that, we'll move on to our next item. And that is the 2020 Work Plan Landscaping Ordinance discussion. Sarah Madden will be, the city planner, will be presenting the item overview and of the background report. Ms. Madden?
Thank you, Commissioner John. So I'm just going to give a quick introduction into the topic, and then the kind of some main overview of the research that was done will be presented by Al Brixias from Northwest Associated Consultants. He's in our consultant pool, and he's helped us out on this topic. So on the 2020 Planning Commission work plan, there were 2 items related to landscaping to look into for possible changes. So those are building perimeter landscaping. That item was added to the Planning Commission work plan based on some discussion at the Planning Commission level by a former planning commissioner who just expressed some interest in what we could do to expand building perimeter landscaping to be more inclusive based on some deviations that had come before on previous applications. The next item was put there by staff. So that's landscaping requirements in open space on large parcels, and that was related to both planning items that came to the commission and council, as well as some building permits where there was some back and forth with the landscape architect or the developer of the property. So you may remember in the last couple of years, most recently, the fire station property where there was some landscaping deviations granted due to the tree preservation on the lot as well as the slope of the lot. About a year or so ago, there was an industrial equities office warehouse CUP invariance where there were landscaping variances granted to the number of shrubs and trees to be installed on the lot based on the steep slopes of the property. So we had kind of seen these recurring themes and put it on the work plan to look into, which some of the research into our ordinance and into our market cities, as well as some recommendations were put together by Northwest Associated Consultants. So the goals of this work plan item were for staff and our consultant to look into the areas of the ordinance where we are seeing land use approvals related to landscaping plans, research some adjustments, inquire with the standards that exist within our market cities, and then look at how we can provide some flexibility in applying these standards because we have a very extensive and detailed landscaping ordinance. So with that, actually, I will turn it over to Al.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Al Brixias. First of all, I would like to tell you that you have a very elaborate and detailed landscape ordinance, so just starting with that. In examining the required minimum number of trees and shrubs that are required, you have this diversity component that stipulates that three out of the four items have to be addressed, and that would address overstory trees, ornamental trees, evergreen trees, and deciduous trees or shrubs. This is calculated based on an open area. While there's no definition of open area in your ordinance, it's generally been applied to the lot area minus the building and hardcover, sidewalks, parking lots. So that issue becomes an area of concern from the standpoint of just a number of shrubs and packing them in as tightly as possible. The other element that you look at is that when you apply each of the thirds, you start with open space calculation on a gross area. So if you look at page 2 of our report, you see that in the case of IRET, the open space is used to calculate each one of the various components, resulting in a fairly large number. The other thing that you should be aware of is that the landscaping that is required for buffer yards, where a industry or commercial abuts a residential area, that is not used to meet the count. Additionally, your landscaping for parking lots, both the screening at the perimeter and the interior landscaping is not credited against that total count. So you're doubling up on landscaping for buffer yards, your parking lot, and then you're doing the total count based on everything else. In looking at those, we looked at a number of other cities and found out that a lot of them have this requirement, but they calculate it differently. A number of cities like Coon Rapids, Bloomington, offer a requirement based on open area. In the case of Bloomington, they do define open area and subtract out a number of elements that go beyond just what the general application in Burnsville is. Some of the communities do a tree shrub count based on linear feet of the lot. Some of them base it on the square footage of the gross floor area, and some on building value. In my examination of this, I would never recommend basing it on the floor space of the building or the building value, because it really has nothing to physically relate to the lot, and becomes a number issue. In looking at the other provisions, other things that you've granted flexibility on is you do mandate a woodland protection where you have significant trees, but those areas are not also subtracted out of your open area. So in some cases where in the past, you've given flexibility where woodland preservation was a predominant component of your site design. Other areas that you've considered for flexibility in the past but not specifically mentioned are steep slopes, where slope preservation was preferred. You also have some other provisions such as mandatory green space for your commercial and residential properties. In our examination of this, we believe that one of the things that you could give as far as considerations is defining what you are going to apply open space to. And in considering that, you have to also consider where these plants can be placed on the lot. Some of the other considerations that we're suggesting is stormwater ponds being subtracted, wetlands where any kind of infill or treatment within the wetland boundary should be subtracted out, where we have pipeline and overhead easements. Originally, we suggested that this be any easement, but city staff said it should specifically apply to where we have a underground utility in place or an overhead that may prevent any planting of any size or either below the surface or into an overhead line should be subtracted. The wetland or the woodland preservation areas, if it's a mandatory woodland preservation area, those trees should be counted as part of the overall landscape requirements. The buffer yard landscaping, and then one of the other elements that I suggested was if we're doing an approved building expansion where we have a phased development, should we be requiring that area where the building is going to expand to provide additional landscaping? You don't want to have landscaping just to be removed with subsequent phases. So those were some of the suggestions that we looked at and we discussed with staff. With regard to perimeter planting, some of the things that we did is we went through Dakota County GIS and looked at a number of sites. We feel that the perimeter planting at 50% can work in industrial and multiple family. But when we start looking at our commercial sites, it becomes much more complicated when the rear of the property and the front of the property is used for parking, loading, receipt of goods, etc. And some of the suggestions that we offered is that we could reduce that percentage from 50% to maybe 30%, but also offer an opportunity to even reduce that further if they did a architectural or aesthetic design component, which is one of your alternative landscape signs, plaza areas, seating areas, planters rather than just shrubs and plants. So in the considerations that we put together here, and tonight we're not asking you to make any motion, we're just looking for any further alterations to what we're suggesting. Then we can hold a public hearing in October and give this consideration. But what we're recommending as part of our plan is we believe that your parking lot landscaping, your buffer yards, most of the details in your plan don't need any modification. We're suggesting that as part of plant diversity, we define open area as calculating the total lot minus stormwater ponds, wetlands, utility easements with pipelines and overhead transmission lines, steep slopes in excess of 12%, woodland preservation areas with significant trees. And the way we would calculate that is if it's a area, it would be calculated based on a dimension that follows the tree canopy perimeters, so that plantings or any disturbance there could compromise a tree. The other elements we have are naturally the building, parking areas, loading areas, and sidewalks and other impervious surfaces. And then in review of the perimeter planting, what we're suggesting is that we leave multiple family, office, clinics, daycares, restaurants at 50%, but allow them to have a reduction where we have an aesthetic design component as an alternative. You already allow that for restaurants that have patios, so I think this would be consistent with that practice. And then in commercial retail sales, on-site service businesses and shopping centers, our recommendation is to look at a 30% perimeter planting and still allow for that exception where we have the aesthetic design component outlined in your alternative landscape options. In this respect, some of the other cities have or recognize that their planting totals result in overcrowding, and they've made provisions for a cash contribution in lieu of plantings. That's not something I would recommend because I don't think it relates to the individual site, and I don't think, that where's that money going to be? I think it's an impact fee that is not justified. Are there any questions?
Any questions, commissioners? Commissioner Wad?
You mentioned reduction for aesthetic design component. Who evaluates the aesthetic design component? What process is that?
Currently, the way it's evaluated under alternative designs, it's subject to review. I had to get that provision out.
I can actually answer that. So there are in the landscaping ordinance, it does list a few examples of aesthetic design components that are like plazas and things similar to that. But then it does say, or other options is reviewed by the Development Review Committee. So that phrase is used frequently in the zoning ordinance, and essentially what that means is we do have a Development Review Committee of staff, building, engineering, fire, natural resources, forestry, planning. We are the chair of that committee. And we meet bi-weekly to go over both building permits and our current active land use applications that come before the Planning Commission. So it is a staff-led committee that evaluates it if it gets to that point. But typically, it lists a few of those aesthetic design options within the zoning ordinance that they could provide as an example.
Great. So it gets reviewed.
It gets reviewed.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
That was a good question. Yeah.
Any questions or more discussion? Commissioner Timmerman?
I'm curious what, I guess, when the bulk of this ordinance was established. It looks like there's some citations of 1980s, some changes in 2012. I guess, this is such a thorough ordinance. I'm curious the purpose for many of the existing ordinances and kind of the backstory a little bit too before we make any dramatic changes.
I think, a lot of times as a city becomes or evolves, becoming more fully developed, I've had other clients that had green space mandatory green space requirements, 30 or 40%. And as they developed and they wanted their businesses to grow in place, they re-examined that green space as potential building envelopes and moved away from it. I think you're looking at an evolution of what's occurring here. A couple of things that I was sensitive to in looking at this is that I think you want to look at where existing businesses, specifically industries, have the opportunity to grow in place and expand so you can have that retention. One of the things I suggested is that if you have a phased development plan, would you require the landscaping against that expansion area, against the building envelope? I think we're comfortable with what we're suggesting right now, but I think anytime you have ordinances out that are 1980s and evolving through the years, your goals are going to change. The physical opportunities within each site's going to be different. You're going to have maturing businesses that are going to look at what they're going to do next. And the other element that I looked at is the diversity count is, while most of the market cities have this, it's not necessarily related to site design. It just gives you a number count based on, you use open space, others use perimeter. And it's really not necessarily directed at the areas that you really need the landscaping from a utility standpoint. The other element that I thought was extraordinary is that you have a fairly detailed buffer yard requirement as far as opacity, height, design, everything, where you have these, but regardless of how number of planting it takes to get there, you still have to provide the other planting. And the area you're putting the buffer yard in is still calculated against your open space, so you're doubling up and doubling up. Same holds true for your landscape plan for your parking lots. I think I wouldn't change anything related to that, but I would at least give the businesses or the developer the opportunity to have those counted against your total lot count, because they serve both a utility function as well as an aesthetic function, and probably the areas that you most want to give attention to. But as far as the total history, I don't have the total history since the 80s, but I know that we have served you in the past, and some of that language that we're changing is probably some of the stuff that we offered them back then.
Something I liked in the whole background is, as I was reading it, I was thinking, well, what is an open space, or why, what defines it and things. And as I got further down the report, there it was listed. So I think a lot of the recommendations you made a lot of sense. I don't think there was anything I could see that would jump out at me and say, well, that's not right, or.
We were hoping you would agree with that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'd be a lost leader.
Yeah, especially when you talk about doubling up with the buffer areas. I mean, it's just a language thing probably more than anything. One thing it was called a story tree or a one-story tree?
Overstory tree.
Overstory tree. What does that exactly mean?
Overstory are generally treated as your shade trees, your elms, your ash, those type. Ornamental trees are going to be a shorter, performing a different function. And so you have different categories that are established, and you also have a list of plantings or tree species that you have preferred.
That fit within these different categories, basically?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner, or Chair Timmerman.
I noticed that a couple other cities have limitations on species. Do you have any recommendations on that with ash issues or any other types of?
Actually, I would leave that to your city forester as far as those alternatives. A number of my cities have a list of prohibited trees because of different hardiness and disease components, and I can certainly provide that, but I don't think it's gonna be anything different than what you're already implementing.
So to interject, our city forester does have a packet list that he provides when requested that does list all of the trees that we will not accept. Yes, so we review that when we review landscaping proposals that come before you.
I gotta believe that you probably have everything related to landscaping you could possibly have. Based on what, the heat reduction thing was specifically unique to you. And I think that's a great idea, though. And that was the one trees that were counted with the total tree count. Others weren't.
I didn't realize we had a city forester, so I learned something new today. Any other discussion, commissioners?
Just a comment. I mean, this
Commissioner
commission has always been green-friendly, for lack of words, and there's certain people on this commission that take it really to heart. So looking at what you guys were proposing and bringing us up to speed in 2020 and how the changes are going to react to architecture and things like that and other alternatives that we didn't have back in the day that we do have now, it looked very promising. So keeping in mind the green space that we love to have and having that still available, plus what's going on, was nice to read up. I'm not an expert on this stuff, but it wasn't, by the end of when I got to it, I felt pretty good about it. So thanks for the efforts you're putting onto this too.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other comments or discussion?
If you have any other changes or suggestions as you look at this, you can please give them to staff and we'll have them ready for you when we take this to public hearing.
Perfect, thank you. And that was for informational and educational purposes, so no official action is required. And we'll move on to updates. Any updates, commissioners? Seeing none, staff.
Yes, so your October 12th planning commission meeting will be canceled. So the next time we'll see you will be the second meeting in October. I believe it's the 26th, but I'm not looking at a calendar. So right now, on that, we will definitely, or we are planning to have the proposed ordinance ready for public hearing on that date. The other items, we don't have submitted yet, so I can't get you any additional information. But yes, your next meeting on October 12th will be canceled. And those are my updates.
Great. Looks like the next item on our agenda is adjournment. Do I have a motion?
I'll move.
Commissioner Henderson moves. Anyone second?
Second.
Commissioner Awad seconds. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That completes it. We're all done. Thank you for joining us tonight.